A little over a year ago, John and I did a TED Talk in New Orleans about human connection. And you may not think that is a big deal, but it was kind of a big deal because I'm from Berkeley. I was born there. I'm the founder of Move On and Moms Rising. And I had to be very intentional about, thank you, about finding people that were conservative to talk to because I was curious and I had a lot of questions.
Well, I am not a progressive. It may be obvious. I'm actually from Kentucky originally, coal mining country of Kentucky. And in the 80s, I worked in Republican politics. I worked for the first President Bush, Republican National Committee, Senator Mitch McConnell. I'm sure he's very popular around here. And but that was a while ago. So for the last 25 years, I've been in technology. I moved out to Seattle to join the original Microsoft Office team, and then came down here to work for Netscape and became the team lead for, product manager lead for Netscape Navigator. Today, I live in San Francisco, and believe it or not, I am still a Republican.
And
That's awesome. I love that. That's great.
And John's my very good friend. And we agree on some really critical things. That, in fact, we are living in increasingly toxic times politically. And that not only are we ceasing to share facts, we're living in separate narratives, and that's a huge problem. So a number of years ago, I co-founded with many partners from many backgrounds something called Living Room Conversations that allow people to have conversations across different, small conversations with just, and here we have the picture, me in my living room with a living room conversation with my Tea Party co-founder friend, Mark Meckler, and that was a great conversation, and also we're doing it by video. So Living Room Conversations is creating that capacity for us to have these conversations in a container that allows us to really listen. And that's something that I think will really resonate in this crowd.
So while Joan was starting Living Room Conversations, I was looking at the problem in a little different way. She was basically dealing with relationship filter bubbles. And I was thinking about information filter bubbles and started something called All Sides. Now, the idea here is that I was very concerned that people didn't really see the whole picture. And the idea here is using a lot of technology and sentiment analysis in other ways, we automatically show different points of view of the same news story right next to each other. You can even do searches online with this. And actually, instead of seeing what you frequently get on Google or other search engines, kind of the same perspective, but from 12 different sources, we automatically provide different perspectives on the same issue, on the same news, so that we can actually be free to decide for ourselves, to think for ourselves. And then I met Joan. And the thing is that it's really interesting because we realized immediately. Joan asked me to go on a walk, and one of my moral of stories is if Joan Blades asks you to go on a walk, go on that walk. Because we just went on a walk, it was in Virginia, and we realized that what we were doing was completely complementary, that we completely were fighting the same fight, and then bringing together freedom from information filter bubbles and relationship filter bubbles, there was really some magic that could be had there. So, what's happened since our TED Talk? Over 1 million people viewed it. Living Room Conversations are happening all over the country. All Sides is at about 2 million views per month. And so let's do a thought experiment. What if tomorrow morning when all the leaders in DC woke up, they all had climate change as their top concern? What would happen? Now, when I think about that, I go, okay, what are some of the things they agree on? Let's look at healthcare. Everybody would agree we want affordable, great healthcare. And our leaders have been working on that for decades. And they have achieved the most expensive healthcare in the world per capita. And we're not even in the top 10 when it comes to outcomes. So it's not just about convincing people. It's about having a relationship. It's about caring about each other. so that we have everybody's best ideas in the room. And when we care about each other, then everything changes.
So when you want to fix a problem, we got to start by looking at the cause of the problem. And this is kind of where we get to it. So 22 years ago, at I guess it's actually up in Portland, Oregon, I gave a speech. And I had other people in Netscape back then. We were totally bought into the promise of the internet. So we'd be connected to all this great information online and all these great people. So we could actually make great decisions for ourselves with really good information, better decisions. And we appreciate people for who we individually are, not just tolerate them, but really appreciate who they are. And in a lot of ways, the internet's done that. But I was concerned that we would actually also have this problem where the internet would train us to discriminate against each other in new ways. And what they now call that is filter bubbles. So here's what's really happened. So we have this overwhelming noise of information. Too many people, too much information, so we actually go ahead and we filter it out. We use technology. And we use that technology to kind of just let in what we want to let in. And there are two very scary things that happen then. When we only are around people just like us, or we only see information that we already agree with, study after study shows this, a University of Colorado studied this recently, that we become much more extreme in our points of view. And we become much less tolerant of anybody with a different point of view or any idea that's different than ours. That's pretty much what we're seeing nationwide and worldwide, in modern worldwide today. But there is a solution to that, and that's getting out of these crazy filter bubbles.
Okay, so let's filter bubbles. How many of you in this group have friends that have really different political beliefs? Okay, good. Now, how many of you have political conversations about the things that are challenging with those friends? That's pretty good. It's not everybody for sure, but that's pretty darn good. The interesting thing interesting is kind of not the right word. The really disturbing thing that's going on is we're finding more and more people are not comfortable co-hosting a conversation, having a conversation across differences, because so many people have lost relationship in the last few years because political polarization has escalated. So we do have technology to help. We have the video conversation, so people can have video living room conversation with friends and old schoolmates in other parts of the country. And we have friends telling friends, but we also have
something we like to call mismatch. So the idea, it's kind of like a dating site, but in a way, the worst dating site ever. So we're not matching you with your future, we're mismatching you across divides, socioeconomic, political, geographical divides, for a genuine, real conversation. And we don't really know necessarily how to do that as individuals anymore. So we actually include, and you see in the screen, how we actually guide you with a very carefully structured conversation guide, step by step, that Living Room Conversations has been using over 1,000 times. And what happens is, accidentally, we discover our common humanity and where we actually agree and how we can come together. It's not just a little app. This is actually for a much broader world. It's a platform for the Bridge Alliance. There are over 90 organizations part of this Bridge Alliance, which each organization is actually dedicated to bridging divides across differences. And they're not the only ones who are interested. Schools, nationwide, we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. News media, we've already worked with that have, surprisingly enough, that have actually already given us like 1 million views in just a month with kinds of things we have. Libraries, 10,000 libraries in the nation, 100,000 school libraries. They want to be the center of a community for people to come together. We're talking to national restaurant chains. And we're also seeing a really remarkable thing happening in faith communities.
So last month, I got this wonderful video from Boise, Idaho. I visited there last year, and I stopped at the Vineyard Boise Christian Fellowship. And I started watching this sermon from their Campfire series, and I realized all of a sudden that they were actually talking about living room conversations, that they were planning to have monthly living room conversations for their community, and asking their community, what are the questions you're afraid to talk about? And then they plan to take those people that in their community and reach out beyond their community. And this is our dream. Individuals and communities all around the country reaching out and connecting across differences. And I have to, the Reverend Pastor Trevor Estes did this sermon about, the work that Christ did, that Jesus connected. And I'm not good at memorizing things, so I had John put it on a slide for me. Big picture, God is love. You cannot make God visible to others without loving them right where they are. That means outsiders are welcomed. Outsiders find warmth. Outsiders are invited into deep conversation, and they don't get burned. The sermon gave me chills. This is what we're dreaming of. And I got to hear things in a new way.
Yeah, it's really a beautiful thing to experience. We are seeing it in schools as well. And we just got together recently with the schools program, just started last year, really. And we're already being used by teachers in 47 different states, with 12,000 students and teachers using our tools every week. We just did just started a partnership with iCivics that's going to get us to 6 million more students in a year. There is a thirst out there for not being manipulated by outrage, but for understanding what's going on and having that personal connection.
And it's an amazing partnership for all sides of living room conversations. Because when we have relationships with each other, then we can have everybody's best ideas in the room, and we have the agility to adapt and actually come up with solutions. That's what we've got to do. And I'm a grassroots person. I think it's got to start with us.
So the question is that enough? I mean, we're going to talk about a lot of things this whole weekend, and that's really remarkable. Is that going to change the course of our future history? Well, one thing that we've been talking to is we've been talking to academics about movements, about social change. And we learned something quite interesting, that in general, that if you see a change at the national level, or in other cases, about 3.5% of the people have been engaged in that in some way. That once that happens, any group that hits that level, actually change happens. Legislation changes, the culture changes, society changes, the way we interact change. We have 330 million people in America. 3.5% of that, depending on whether you count just registered voters or everybody, that's anywhere between 5 million and 11 million people. That's a very doable number. And let's put on our hats of like innovators and technologists and think about product adoption. You're all probably familiar with an adoption curve like this. Well, 3.5% is only that small group of innovators and early adopters. Some people get discouraged that there are people on the extremes that will never listen to the other side. Well, to some extent, who cares? We have enough interest already nationwide to reach the innovators and early adopters. We just have to engage them and empower them, and with that, we can change the course of history.
So our message is, together we can do this.
We really can.
But we need you to lead.
Yeah, we are very pragmatists. I mean, from Move On to high-tech stuff, the reality is these things are not stuff you watch and see happen. It's stuff that we make happen. Every type of movement starts with groups like this and people in the room. It comes to us as individuals. So we invite you to do that. Invite them to join
Sunday
morning.
9:30.
Okay.
Questions and answers. Stage.
Maybe questions. I don't know about the answers.
Whatever it is. Anyway, I think it's over that way. Come join us. Have a living room conversation. It's not so much our answers as much as you guys getting a chance to try it out, because we want you to take it home with you
And we're around, so
around.
find us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you.